Thank you all so much for joining. This is my Australian BookTube round table. We are covering most of the states. Our Tasmanian person is not currently here. And well, technically we're covering all of the states, just not the territories. We couldn't find anyone from the Northern Territory or ACT. So we got most of Australia here. But obviously we don't represent all of Australia. We're pretty much one demographic we have here. So we can only speak to our own experiences and what we know. But there are so many more like awesome Australian booktubers, bookstagrammers out there that cover a much more diverse range. I'm Kat. I am from Stars and Embers, and I am in Victoria right now.
I'm Jenna. I'm from the channel Just a Little Bit Random, and I am from South Australia.
Hi, I'm Bianca Breen on Instagram, and I'm from Western Australia.
Hi, my name is Grace. You might also know me as G Swizzle. That is my channel name, and that is also my Instagram handle, but add the books. It's G Swizzle Books. And I am from New South Wales.
I'm Lana, and my channel name is Law and Lullabies, and it's pretty much that on all of the other things as well. And I am representing Queensland.
Hello people who are watching. My name's Mel. My booktube channel is a book fiend named Mel, and my Twitter is at a book fiend Mel. And I am representing Tasmania.
So I wanted to get the other states here to talk about different parts of Australia and being like a book person in Australia. And so I think we're going to start with like a book recommendation or any authors you like. Does anyone have like something that they're burning to talk about? I also have an idea of what most people also choose. So
yeah, I feel like mine are pretty generic, but for good reason. Like, they're amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my favorite Aussie authors are actually from Victoria because they're the ones that I became most familiar with when I moved there. But Amie Kaufman is probably number one. Lili Wilkinson, everything she writes is just friggin' so good. Lynette Noni introduced me to Australian writing. Like, people in Australia wrote fantasy. Who knew? Not me. Kostakis and Astrid Scholte, all-time favorites.
Love them all.
I'm sorry if everyone else had those two.
Jenna, I know there was one in particular that you like.
I don't know. I don't think anyone would be able to guess that. No, huge fan of Lynette Noni, and also love Jodi McAlister. Read her book, well, one of them earlier. I think it was last year, and oh my god, yeah, that one, and it was so good. Yeah, definitely. I think everyone, if you've ever been on my channel ever, you'd know I have a little crush on the Akarnae Madoran Chronicles series.
Yes, amazing.
I just finished The Prison Healer yesterday, and I'm obsessed. If you guys don't know, The Prison Healer is by Lynette Noni. That is her latest book, and it just had my jaw dropping to the floor. Absolutely loved it. But also, if you've been watching my channel for a while, like we're talking about back in 2016, you'd know that my first book review was by it was about a book by Megan Jacobsen called Yellow. And that kind of opened my eyes to young adult fiction set in Australia. And she was one of the first authors that I met as well. And I also endorsed Jodi McAlister's Valentine when I had an ARC copy. I mean, now it's just so weird seeing that her trilogy is finished, and I know her too, and getting to meet her and her getting to thank me for that review, like, so unreal. I really loved that series, and I love championing on Aussie authors because they write fantasy too. They write in the genres that I love to read and genres that many people love to read as well. So yeah, those are a few of my favorites personally, but very recent favorite, Lynette Noni's The Prison Healer. Absolutely love it. Highly recommend it.
so great to hear, because I thought I was a bit of a like freak for not knowing about Australian YA until I think 2018. So I'm really glad that I'm not the only one who discovered it late.
No, I only started reading in 2014, but I'd say 2016 is when I started dabbling into Aussie fiction.
Yeah. And that's the sad thing, where I feel like you don't really know about it unless you really look into it. So
yeah.
It's true.
I remember at school, my favorite author was John Marsden. He did the Tomorrow series.
Yep.
And I think my other favorites are Matthew Reilly. I really like a couple of his series. And the other one is Jaymin Eve. She's an indie author and writes like paranormal romance, fantasy, all with happy ever afters. And I actually just got Prison Healer delivered to my door a couple of days ago, so I'm really excited to read that.
it's really good.
Oh, I started it last night. I'm so excited.
I love that we all stand Lynette Noni here.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
We do.
And now I will finish the Akarnae series. So
Yay.
Yes.
Do it. Do it.
Finish the series.
now that I know that my favorite character is around.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, you're finally up to that.
I've only read the first book of the Akarnae series, and I really liked Caden. And then I messaged Kate and was like, I really like this character. Is there more of him in the rest of the series? And she was like, oh, I don't really remember him. And I was like, okay, so he doesn't become a love interest and he doesn't die. He's just not memorable. I won't rush to read the rest of the series then. A week ago, I watched Jenna's video and she mentions Caden dating someone. And I was like, excuse me? So
Yeah, Caden's been favorite too.
He's a good one. We like Caden.
yeah, it's good to hear.
We see Caden here in this place.
Oh, yeah. I pulled some books as well. So I had Valentine with me. Oh, there's Mel. Mel is here.
Yay!
So I had Valentine, which I loved. Australian, Faye. Really need to watch the rest, and I'm watching my ring light fall. I don't know if you can see that get darker. Australian, Faye. Really need to read the rest of the series because I loved it, and I've met Jodi before as well, and she's lovely. Oh, and then I had Queens of Geek by Jen Wild. She lives in America, but she is Australian. So I loved this. Conventions, geekiness, fandom references, friend. I loved it. And then a little known one, The Things I Didn't Say by Kylie Fornasia. This came out a while ago. It is about a girl with selective mutism and how she deals with that. And I really loved it. And mine also came with a sticky note from Kylie in it that says, "You are strong." And then it relates to what's happening in this scene. So I like that about my copies.
So I sort of assume that you guys have also, well, there you go. I'm assuming that someone has mentioned Garth Nix already, but I'm assuming
We haven't.
incorrectly.
Actually.
Garth Nix.
Should have.
We're all like, oh.
Oh, wait a minute. So he wrote the Abhorsen Sabriel Abhorsen series, and he also wrote I don't know what the series is called, but the first, it's bunch of different kids, it's middle grade books anyway, and there are a bunch of different names to do with days of the week. So there's like Mr. Monday, I can't remember what they're all. That's really fun. Sorry,
Keys to the Kingdom.
yes, that's them. Yeah, so they're really fun. And then also Angel Mage, which I haven't actually read yet, and a couple of other adult ones which I am planning on reading. So he's probably my favorite Australian author. But I recently read The Interrogation of Ashala Wolf by Ambelin Kwaymullina, and that was really, really good. That's the only book of hers that I've read, but I immediately went and ordered the next 2 books in that series, so I'm really excited to get to those.
If you're on the Ambelin train, you have to have Catching Crow. It's just amazing.
Beg your pardon, sorry?
Catching Crow is also written by Ambelin.
Oh, okay. Is that one of the tribe ones? No, it's
a standalone. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I haven't read that one, but yeah, I want to read more of her stuff because I really enjoyed Ashala Wolf. Leanne Moriarty is my other favorite Australian author. She's just one of my favorite authors in general. So she wrote Big Little Lies and Truly Madly Guilty and a bunch of other different they're kind of domestic mystery type thrillers. Yeah, and then I read Jane Harper's book The Dry that the movie was based on, which is really, really good. So I'm really enjoying her at the moment as well, though again I've only read that one book, but I'm excited to read more of hers. So and lastly, Marlena Marchetta, who wrote Saving Francesca and Looking for Alibrandi, which are young adult kind of coming of age stories, which I thought were really well written. So
yeah, Melina is one of those ones that like authors or Aussie authors always talk about when they're recommending books or what influenced them and stuff.
Yeah, they go back a while now. I think the Looking for Alibrandi was a high school year 12 text about 20 years ago now or something. So
I will jump in with some anthologies because we have been exceptionally blessed with some Australian anthologies like Begin and Begin, Underdog, and Kindred are the 3 that come to mind. But I love short stories and anthologies, and those ones are just absolutely amazing and completely Australian, which I love.
Yeah, I need to read Underdog. I bought it at the launch and I still haven't read it.
It's so good. It's so good.
Was like bookstores, if anyone has like a particular bookstore that they really want to talk about, it can be a chain, it can be local, it can be just, you want to be like, hey, I like these people, follow them on social media.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about 2 independents because obviously we have big chains. Well, we have Dimmicks and QBD here. We don't have Readings or Robinsons. But first one is called Rabble Books and Games. They're in Maylands, and they are just absolutely amazing for diverse titles. When I went and checked out their YA section, I wanted to buy everything. All the diverse authors and stories were just front and center, and I loved it so much. It was so good. And the staff are just incredibly welcoming and friendly as well. But it just felt like such a safe space for young people as well, which I really loved. And the other one is called Paperbird Books in Fremantle. And I wanted to mention them because they're particularly a children's and young adult store, but they also have this beautiful safe space for children. They do a YA book club, and they also have a big focus on Indigenous literature as well, which I absolutely love to see. So yeah, they're really great places, and I really want to support them more in future.
Love that.
There's I can think of 3 really cool independent bookstores here in Hobart. So we have the State the State Cinema Bookstore. So it's a cinema, but then they were becoming really popular, so they branched out and they built a cafe, and then they built a bookstore, and it's just a really, really nice little bookstore. Every time I go to North Hobart, I have to go to that bookstore, and it's I'm allowed to go buy a book from there if I want to, even though when I'm on a book buying ban. I don't know how that works, but anyway. But yeah, it's a really nice little bookstore. And then there's Fuller's, who are another independent bookstore, which has got a cafe inside of it as well, which is really nice. And they do focus on a lot of Tassie authors, which is pretty cool. And I think they have a little tiny publishing house as part of what they do as well. And then there's the Hobart Bookstore, which is down in Salamanca, which is kind of one of the more touristy areas, and they focus a lot on secondhand as well as new books, so that's really cool as well. It's a nice mixture, and you can get lots of really different books in there, obviously because it's secondhand as well as the new books. But yeah, they're really cool. And I was just thinking about, going backwards again, about Australian authors. There's a couple of Tassie authors that I haven't read yet, but that look really interesting. So there's someone called, now I wrote this down, Heather Rose, who wrote a book, Bruni, which is all about Bruny Island, and all about, imagine if Bruny Island didn't have access to it and how that might have changed how it kind of developed as an island and what people might, how people might live there. And then the other one is Kyle Perry, who wrote a thriller called The Bluffs, which is set up in northwest Tasmania, which looks really, really interesting. And I've heard really good things. Lots of friends of mine have read it and said it's really good. So yeah, and I found out both of those through Fuller's, which was really nice just to see something a bit local.
One of my favourite bookstores is Off the Book Pages, and Brittany, who owns it, like, they only sell indie books, mainly in like fantasy and romance, and I just thought that was really cool that it's just for indie, and she's Australian. And it was more, I think she started it more to just make it so these books, instead of paying shipping with Amazon or whatever, just to make it easier for people in the Southern Hemisphere to get these books. So it's really, really cool. I like that bookstore.
Oh, sounds good.
If you watch my channel, you'd know how much I go to Kinnikinnia. But that's not technically an Australian. I mean, Kinnikinnia is a Japanese, but yeah, it is. It's a Japanese franchise store that focuses predominantly on all types of literature and manga, and sells also a lot of Japanese and foreign books. And I mostly go there because they're open till 7, because I work full time. So like I can go after I finish work, or I go during my lunch break. It's fun. But if I'm going to be talking about something that is Australian, I'd say around 2 streets away from Kinnikinnia is Abby's Bookshop, which also has Galaxy Bookstore on the 2nd level, and they predominantly specialize in sci-fi, fantasy books. So you've got like the full-on YA section there, and we've done book events there before. It is a smaller, more independent bookstore than the other franchises like Dimmicks and Kinnikinnia, but it kind of has a very good homely feel to it, and I appreciate it for that. So yeah, those are a few I have to recommend in Sydney if you ever come to the CBD.
Oh, and Jenna, if there's anything left in Adelaide that hasn't closed down or is about to move.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, my favourite store was Dimmicks Adelaide, and that's just closed down to make way for a sporting goods store. So we love that.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So we love that. We lost our book club moment. We don't know if we're getting that back. It's all very sad. But I know there is one bookstore in Norwood. I think it's called Dylan's, and it started out as this really tiny store, and then it bought up the store next door, and now it's huge, and it's one of the best bookstores. You just go there and it has such a wide variety of books that you just can't get elsewhere. So considering we can't go to Dimmicks Adelaide anymore, we go to Dylan's.
So I mostly go to Dimmicks and Readings, which are 2 of the bigger chains in Australia. I'd say Dimmicks is probably the closest thing we have to a Barnes and Noble. for Americans watching, if there's any Americans watching. And then, and then a local one to me that I go to more often because it's slightly closer than readings is one called Jeffries. I think they're not a franchise. I think that's just the one that's there. And yeah, I really like them. They have a good like YA fantasy section. I walked in there once and one of the ladies was like, have you read this? Have you read this? Have you read this? And I was like, I've read about half of those. So yes. And they've gotten to know me. They're really good at like ordering things in as well. It's where I go to order all of the things that I'd prefer not to buy from Amazon. And yeah, I like them at Jeffries.
Yeah, Readings is really good as well because they have such a focus on Australian authors. So
yeah, they're good. They do a lot of like events as well. Okay.
We have a Dimmix as well and a QBD, but I figured I'd talk about the independent bookstores.
Yeah. From here, it's just like the experience of being an Aussie book person, anything you like or anything you don't like, the struggles of being an Aussie book person. That's my generalization that I'm using is book person. One thing that I thought about before was like the Americanization of Aussie books when they're published in America, and then like the Australian publishing industry being so small, and then the type of bookish events that we have. And yeah, I don't have a structured plan for this part, so if we just talk and hopefully see what happens.
I mean, I'll start again. Sorry guys. Let's go jumping in. Yeah, again, like obviously my experience will not reflect everyone in WA's, especially when I grew up in a very regional area. WA has, well, all of Australia really has a massive focus on sport, and I feel like the arts and creativity pursuits get very shoved on the back burner. And growing up in a country town in WA was really like that, and I felt like an absolute freak for so long for getting emotionally attached to characters. Like it just seems like it was not a normal thing to do, because not many people around me read until I found the community. So I feel like when you're on the outside of that community, it can be extremely lonely. But the community in Australia, I know we're supposed to be talking about struggles, but this is
that is fine. The struggles, positive things, anything.
Well, that's the thing, like the community is extremely small, but my God, it's so strong, you know, and it's so welcoming and people are so passionate. And I feel like once you find it, everything else kind of falls into place. That's where I started to discover local authors and independent bookstores and more opportunities and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely hard until you know those people, but I feel like a lot of things aren't kind of advertised or introduced as much as they could be, because it's not really that valued in Australia.
Yeah, like we have like writers festivals and stuff and like small book events, but they don't get as much focus on them as, you know, something like the footy where they've just allowed 78,000 people back in, but we can't go to a concert.
Yeah, and especially for young adult too. There's never a big young adult program at the Perth Writers. Well, the Perth Writers Festival is part of Perth Arts Festival, so it's not actually its own thing. And there's never a YA event. I'm becoming more familiar now with the children's literature events, but I've really had to search for them. So yeah, it's all about the sport.
Well, that's also inclusive of our TV as well, because when you really think about it, you're seeing all of our network television filled with sporty things or filled with news, but you know, we could have more adaptations. Like why is the Australian media failing so much? Why are they telling us to not start podcasts? Like getting that desperate because they say Australian in media is dying. They need to think of other ways to innovate. And I think that encouraging Australians to write what they have or the ideas that they have. That's so important, or at least to actually pay attention to it or to focus their marketing on it. I think over the years, I've become a lot more passionate about it. And I've just noticed that as well. There's a lack of focus on the art side of things because everything is so sporty. And I grew up in a rugby league household. Like my parents, my brother, my cousins, all of them are obsessed with rugby league. And when it's so funny because when I go to visit Kat in Melbourne, even though this is side note, but like even though Melbourne Storm always wins, like nobody cares there. It's great.
No one cares all about AFL.
No one cares about the NRL in Melbourne. It's amazing. But I grew up in an NRL household, and it's such a big thing here in Sydney, to the point that when people find out that I'm a booktuber and I talk about books, it's as if people have never heard about books before. It's so weird. But it's just because the Australian media is so surrounded by what they know and what they find is traditional. And I think there just needs to be some sort of way that we can break out of that. And I think I've been talking about this for years, but I don't know how it's going to be done, but I hope it gets done eventually. I hope that maybe even through the whole COVID situation, the whole lockdown situation, it has at least encouraged creators in our country to create more.
Yeah, on a side note from that, when you're talking about like people didn't know, but like about reading books or booktubers, Oz Comic Con, they're now inviting like YouTubers and stuff into their programs. And I applied and they contacted me even though I'm tiny in like the scope of things, because I was the only booktuber that applied. So
amazing.
Yeah, I didn't end up going because it was in Sydney and I couldn't afford Sydney then. But I'm coming to Sydney.
That's really cool though.
But
Keep
yeah, so the fact that I was the only book person, that did fall again. The fact that I was the only book person that applied kind of astounded me, just because like I personally know heaps of booktubers like around, but the world doesn't, or Australia doesn't.
Yeah, and this is what I am hoping comes out of the pandemic as well, is that we were forced to look inwards, like at Australia. Like we couldn't get any big names to come to events, so everyone was from their state, which I thought was really great. And hopefully people start to realize that, oh, we do have talent here, and we should use it more often.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of grew up in a bubble, a reading bubble, because my family are big readers, and I managed to, primary school probably not so much, but in high school I managed to surround myself with lots of readers. So
when I
started BookTube and people were saying, oh, I started my channel because I don't really have any reading friends, I was like, what? What do you mean you don't have friends that read? That seems really strange to me. So I feel like I didn't really necessarily notice whether Australia as a whole, or whether I grew up in Sydney, or whether Sydney as a whole was particularly book aware or what have you, or what was going on there, because I was reading and talking about reading, and my family are big readers. And but our focus when my parents probably more focused on Britain and British books, just because my dad, he's Australian, but the rest of his family are British, so it's kind of like it just was a little microcosm, and I don't think I really was aware of it not particularly being Australian. And even in the last sort of 10-15 years when I've tried to branch out in general, I didn't really seem to occur to me to pay that much attention, and until I started BookTube, and then people were talking about and particularly last year when everyone was talking about trying to become more socially aware and become educate ourselves around Black Lives Matter and different things like that. And I started realizing that I hadn't really read any Aboriginal authors, and so I tried to branch out there, and that's when I started to realize just how American and British centric everything book related was in Australia. And that's why I had the idea to have the readathon that we did last year of having the northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere, because I was noticing that there were all these Christmas themed readathons, but everything was about snow, and I was like, well, that's not what our experience is. And all the book boxes that are seasonal are always American seasons. They're always, and it's just, I really realized how focused everything was around the States and the UK as well, but particularly around the States. And yeah, it was strange. It was a weird kind of awakening.
Yeah, that's like, everything is so Americanized these days that like coming across something Australian, like if it's like a book box or something as well, I'm always like, whoa, that exists. But then sadly, like I don't think I've seen an Australian book box that has lasted like more than a few years max. It's super sad because I'd love to support them, but then they can't exist because A, everything's so expensive in Australia, and B, they just can't get the same stuff that Americans can get.
And thirdly, like they can't get the editions that printed that will give people the incentive to get that internationally posted, unlike the rest. And that's kind of sad.
I was about to say it's really hard for them to, I guess, compete with like Fairy Loot and Alcrate, who have their special editions and the sprayed edges and whatnot. It must be really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been a reader. Like growing up, I used to love reading and whatnot, but it wasn't until a few years ago when I joined a book club here that I realized how sort of hidden Australian literature is, particularly when it comes to YA and fantasy and all of that. It wasn't until I went to a supernova one year, and Lynette Noni was one of the authors there, and I didn't really originally sort of clue on to the fact that her being Australian and there and having this series was so huge. I just bought it on a whim. And I think that was the same year that Sarah J. Maas was there as well. So the difference in the lines between the two of them were just insanity, because, I mean, American books are so popular because they are given the promotion. They're given the promotion everywhere. Whereas Australian books, I don't know if it's because when they're published, they're not often published overseas at the same time or as well. I know, like going back to Lynette, like The Prison Healer is her first fantasy to actually be published overseas. The Madoran Chronicles was almost completely Australian. You couldn't get it if you were in another country. So it sort of begs the question of like, we can't even promote our own books in our country. So why do we think other people are going to be able to read them? And I think that's something that we're definitely losing. We have so many incredible voices here and we're just not letting them be heard.
Like not having an international platform is kind of really sad, because like I want to talk about like Valentine with all of my American people, because I'm like, Faye, hot Faye, like you would like this, but it's really hard for them to access it. And I'm sure there's some sort of like laws against the printing and distribution and stuff, which is hindering a lot of it. But then also for the Hemisphere Games, I recommended What I Like About Me by Jenna Guillaume as an Aussie Christmas book. And then it's now published in America, but they took out all of the mentions of Christmas because they didn't want Americans to be like, a hot Christmas? What is this?
Because heaven forfend. Meanwhile, there are places in America like Florida where they actually don't have cold, snowy Christmases anyway. So it's like,
nope.
Yeah, speaking of Jenna's Yeah, Jenna Guillaume's books, because she's been posting about all the changes between Australia to USA and how everything in that book has become American. And I just remember thinking, well, what's the point? Like, this book is Australian. Why does it have to be rewritten to be an American book? And it was just really sad because I thought they'd want to see the experience, you know. And on that note, Gary Lonsborough's The Boy from the Mish is also going to America. So hopefully they won't change a lot of that because it's obviously a big Indigenous focus, but that one will be interesting as well. Yeah, we can't really share our stories if they're not like our stories anymore.
Yeah. And then even when that doesn't happen maybe with the book, like Big Little Lies, when it was adapted, they changed everything so that it was in the States.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
I was very surprised about that.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was Australian, like, to begin with, and then because I just thought it was an American thing, and then they were like, oh yeah, it takes place in Sydney, like in the books, and I'm like, I think it's Sydney, and then I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like, why is that necessary for it to change from Sydney to West, like California? Like, sure, it's not like there was anything overtly Australian anyway. It wasn't like it was a really intense, specifically Aboriginal culture or something that they legitimately might not understand. Although they should be reading that anyway because, you know, like learning about other cultures is great. But yeah, it was just a city on the water. It wasn't like there was anything in it that was.
Yeah, it's like Australia's just not of interest. Like, no one wants to read Australian fiction. It's not a big seller.
Yeah.
But also, I think they're wanting to promote their A-list actors as well, as opposed to elevating Australian actors. If they're going to Americanize an entire Australian book, like, that's Aussie through and through. That's what I got out of it, essentially. Like, even though Nicole Kidman was in it, still Americanized to the max.
Yeah, but apparently it's much easier for people like Nicole Kidman to do an American accent than for any Americans to even pretend to try an Australian.
Americans can't do Australian accents. They just can't.
No, that's true.
I have not found one accurate one at all.
Yep.
No.
Nope.
Lana, did you?
I think that's the superpower that some of us have.
Yeah.
No, but I'm definitely on board with all of these, like, especially when you brought up the Big Little Lies. I was like, oh, because it makes me so mad. Not a fan of it. Not a fan.
Yeah, like, if we have to change our stuff for them, they should have to change their stuff for us. Like, swap everything out. Put U's in every book. If I don't see a U in an American book.
Exactly. And it's not like Americans don't want to know either, because I'm in Space Sirens, a book club with Americans and, like, English people, and I was, like, talking about things from, like, in Australian culture and in New Zealand culture, and they're like, honestly have no idea about your culture at all. They're not taught anything in schools or anything like that, so everything they hear is from the media.
Yeah.
And it's just been Americanized, all of it.
Yeah. I've talked to Americans who didn't even realize that the seasons were opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. I was like, okay, I mean, you should be taught that in school, for one, but if you had more of our books and TV shows, you'd know.
But then apparently they take out all references to Christmas when it's hot. So that just
or they
blows my
tag
mind.
you book tags that have to do with the opposite season in your country, and you're like, well, I can't do the fall time cozy time book tag because it's spring.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I might actually go and deliberately find all of the winter tags and be like, guess what? It is winter in Australia, so I'm doing the winter tag. Totally out of, and they'll be like,
do it. Just own your Australianness.
Yeah, let's throw winter in their faces this year in the middle of like June and July. Let's do it.
Yeah, because I was, for one, was sick of getting beanies in a book box in the middle of summer.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing that I find really strange. It's not just that they have like wintry stuff in a book box. Well, actually it is. It's that they're so insular that they can't imagine that anyone else would have a different experience. So of course it's winter for me, so therefore it'll be winter for everyone, so I'll put a beanie in. It's like there are other parts of the world that don't have the same experiences as you. Like, yeah, I mean, it's a nice idea, but at the same time, like, it just strikes me as odd that they make things seasonal like that. You're like, really? But it's not the same season for everyone.
Yeah, it's hard living here sometimes when you're on your favorite author's Instagram and they're like, I have a really cool pre-order campaign going for my novel, and then you're like, yeah, there it is, US only, and you're just like, can we just get something over here? Like the US only stuff is just all the shipping problems. You want to get like a signed book and you're like, well, that's great, I'll pay $20 for this signed book and $60 for the shipping, and it just becomes so much harder. So we see all these incredible special editions and collector's editions, signed books, pre-order giveaways, and we're all just sitting here in Australia like, yep, so if I want to pay an arm or a leg for it, I can have it. But so I think some people I know have resorted to, they've got friends in the US who get it for them and then ship it over, and that's so much cheaper. But then you have to be able to have a friend there, you have to be willing to do it, and it just becomes so much harder.
Yeah, my heart broke that I wasn't allowed to join in the latest Miss Peregrine's pre-order campaign. I'm the biggest fan, and it wasn't even being able to pay for shipping. It was just USA only. That was it. Devastating.
And then there are the time zones as well when it comes to some certain like pre-order campaigns or book boxes. I mean, if you guys know me well, based on my comments or what I say on my channel, I get up as soon as a special edition that I want has been released. And this Saturday, there's one that I'm waiting on at 3:15 in my time zone AM. Yeah. And I'm just like anxious because I don't think that I'm going to be able to solidify it as much as everybody else. And I get it. Like, it's probably going to be like $200 including shipping. But like, I look forward to it so much because we rarely get that here. We rarely get these opportunities to get special edition books here. So I have to get up in my specific time zone when I kind of feel like it would be easier if they did reserve some boxes for people in different countries. I know that some people or some bookish boxes have been reserving boxes for US people and UK people. But being that Australia is also a big book market, I would like to see some representation there. If not, that's cool. But just putting it out there. That'd be pretty cool because I don't want to miss out if I accidentally sleep in during the time that everybody's buying a special edition book.
We're willing to pay if they're willing to, notice us.
Yeah.
Just 10 copies. Just 10. That's all we're asking for.
Just 10 copies for the Australians, please.
Okay, so now I wanted to move into like events and stuff. So if you have events that you've really liked going to, and then like we did have like events were getting more common and stuff before COVID. So that was a good trajectory that was happening, but then we still like also don't get events like BookCon or Book Expo. Like we've never had something big like that. So if anyone has thoughts on that, because I'm really sad that we don't get those really big events.
We do have Sydney Writers Festival here in Australia, but a lot of the time it's focused on writing rather than just the bookish event. I mean, there are times where people do have bookish discussions, and then we used to have this thing called All Day YA. I think they're gonna do it this year, but differently. And then I don't remember what it was called, YA Con or something like that. It was just an hour where every single person who walked in got goodies and then pretty much just had a fun time doing book trivia. And majority of the time it was hosted by Will Kostakis or Floss before Floss went to the US. That was really fun. But I don't know if they're going to do that again this year. And I think it's to do with the whole pandemic situation. So we used to have that. That would happen once a year. And then we'd also have Free Comic Book Day, which I'm pretty sure, I don't know if every state has Free Comic Book Day. No? Okay, yeah, we're lucky. So I think it's because of Kinnikinnia. Because Kinnikinnia is big on manga and graphic novels. They host Free Comic Book Day, which is essentially a day where people can line up and get their favorite issues of comic books that artists have issued out for free internationally. But also you get to cosplay, which is really cool. And that was really fun, but I don't know if they're going to do that again, once again, due to the pandemic. So yeah, those were events that happened beforehand. And then at Kinnikinnia, they were we did have signings very often. My first ever book signing was a Sarah J. Maas one there, but she's probably too big for a Kinnikinnia signing now. Yeah. So, but we don't get that anymore. It's mostly virtual signings.
I did want to say that I love Sydney's YA lineups. Usually, like, they seem to have such a great YA, like their YA day and ones that they had, just absolutely amazing. Very jealous. Want to go to one day. Speaking for WA, I have only really come across the festivals in the past year since I've been back here. And two of them, there's Scribblers and there's the Australian Storytellers Festival, are very focused on younger children. But Scribblers is getting Amie Kaufman and Will Kostakis, which I'm really excited about. So we do get some. And like I said before, Perth's Writers Festival is part of the Arts Festival, and there are a lot of big literary names. Like, we've had Neil Gaiman and like Magda Savansky, but nothing that has really interested me before. Like, nothing really YA. But yeah, there's no big writers festivals as such. But like I said, I've only really started to become familiar with them in the past year or so, which makes me really sad. I wish I knew about them before. And I don't know if that's my fault or whether you really do just have to dig for them to find them. But yeah, sad times.
Yeah, Victoria does have a big like writer literary scene. Melbourne Writers Festival happens every year. It's quite big, but like the stuff I'm interested in is like the YA fantasy stuff, and that's usually condensed into like one weekend. Yeah, so I usually end up going to like two or three events max.
And that's what's quite hard, because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I can be very quick to dismiss, like, if there's no YA sort of stuff, I'm like, we don't have anything in Australia, you know, like we do, but the sort of stuff that a lot of the younger people focus on is not quite big, but it should be, because they're the future, we're the future, you know.
Yeah, it focuses much more on like literary writers and non-fiction writers. There's like a big non-fiction like
very like serious stuff, which is great, but
Yeah, I wish they would focus more on like YA and fantasy and sci-fi, because that's what people are reading, and then maybe in the future they'll go on to the more serious stuff. But yeah, and also like with our events, like we attend them, we also have to purchase our own books. Like in America at BookCon, you just see them walking around with piles of free books, which I mean is like good that you get free books, but also like, are you going to read them all? Like there's two sides of that. But that's like, you can see just how like privileged America is with that, and then that's something we can't do because the publishing industry here can't afford it. So yeah.
I've only ever been to one event, and it was just a 1-day event in Brisbane. That's the only thing. And after I went to that, I was like, oh, that's really fun. I want to look for some more. None. But absolutely none. All of them were online and just virtual book signings and events. And the only other book event that I know of is the Ball Gowns and Books events. That's in Sydney. And they had one in like 2019, I think, and then COVID happened. And then they've just announced that they're going to be doing it again, but it's not till 2023.
Wow.
So
I haven't even heard of it, and I'm in Sydney. I should check it out.
Yeah, it's only a 2-day thing. It's like a Friday night and then a Saturday this time. I think the Friday night is where you get to like dress up in like a frock, and I think the theme's masquerade.
Oh.
So you get to frock up, and all of the authors are there frocked up as well, and you can buy your books and get them signed, etc. Then they have the full day of the normal book event.
That sounds really cool.
Yep, group trip in 2023.
Sounds really cool, but it's so far away, and that's the only other one that I know of that's not an online event.
Yeah.
I mean, Adelaide had, like, we have the Adelaide Writers Festival, but again, it's mostly focused on literary fiction and non-fiction. And then we usually get, in the last couple of years, we've had like an afternoon of YA, but it's never much and it's never convenient. It's usually during the week, which is not, the most convenient. But apart from that, I mean, before they closed, Dimmicks Adelaide was doing, they do signings when they could, but I found that on a lot of, if an author in Australia was getting a book tour, they'd tend to skip Adelaide. And I guess, Mel, Hobart would get skipped all the time as well, I'm sure. So I found that, the state quite often got skipped. The only time it wouldn't is if it just happened to coincide with something like Supernova. So if an author was coming for Supernova and they happened to have a book coming out, they'd usually do a signing then at like a launch then as well. But apart from that, I found a lot of authors just don't make it to Adelaide in order to even do signings. So we'd maybe get one every couple of months if we were lucky. The most time we have authors is during Supernova, and even then it's not a lot of people know about it. If they think about Supernova, they only think about the celebrities that are going to be there, and then there's me in the corner going, no, but the authors are really cool too, come see them. And the funny thing is like the authors, it's completely free to go up and talk to them. You don't technically have to buy their book or get it signed. You can just go up and have a chat, and it's fantastic. But people just don't, it's never advertised much at all. So apart from that, most of the events are online, of course, if you want to go to any.
One of them I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, is called SwanCon. And it's a big focus on fantasy and sci-fi. It's like board games and books and TV, like it's huge. And I'd never heard of it until this year. And I was going to go and I was really excited. And it was over the weekend and Perth went into lockdown. So I did not get to go. It was so sad. And so typical. Like the one time I had something on a weekend. And we went into lockdown. Yeah. But I'm sure it's a great con. I'm sure it is. Very nerdy, which is what I was hoping for. So maybe next time.
And Mel, is there anything that happens in Tassie?
Yeah, we have a a lot of sort of local Tassie, more the writers side of things. So we have like little local events, not really festivals, but like just little kind of workshops and stuff occasionally, but definitely no signings in any bookstores or anything like that. And yeah, mostly we get skipped when it's like a tour or something. The only thing that would probably be particularly on a big scale is the Mona festivals, the Mona and the Mona, the winter one, and they had Neil Gaiman the year before last, but it's an arts thing, so it's all sorts of arts and stuff, so it's not necessarily focusing on authors. So like they had Neil Gaiman, but they're not necessarily going to go out of their way to get lots of different authors.
I think you must have had him the same time we did, so he just did the
tour. Yes, like that. So it's that kind of thing where, oh, I'm going to Australia for an event, I might as well go for multiple events kind of thing. And I unfortunately didn't get to go because by the time I'm too slow to get involved in things. By the time I kind of went, oh, I should go and look up what's going on. Oh, Neil Gaiman, oh my God, it's sold out. So yeah, I need to be much quicker about stuff. But yeah, book cons and stuff, like I didn't even know that was a thing until I started BookTube, and then people were talking about it. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Okay. One last thing, because it's getting late and I'm pretty sure we're losing Grace.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So basically I want to end on a positive note. So what would you guys like to see in the community now that, you know, we're allowed back out of our homes most of the time? And then just like whether you want events or like more promotion for authors, or just more of the world to know more about Australia, or what you'd like to see published or adapted, anything.
I think promotion, definitely, because and I'm not even exaggerating here, like I've never read a Love Oz YA book that I haven't liked. Like we genuinely have the most amazing authors and stories and writing styles here that just slip under the radar. And I would love for kids at school, like, you know, much younger kids, to be reading them as well. Like it breaks my heart when I see like an 11-year-old picking up a Sarah J. Maas book. Not only are they way too young, but also I just want them to know, like, look what these Australians have done, and you know, this is something that you could do as well. And it's always important to see yourself in a book, even if it's just a hot Christmas, you know. I would love to see more Aussie books in the hands of Aussie readers for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. And there, like I said, there are so many. I mean, not that people can't read Sarah J. Maas, although maybe 11-year-olds not so much, but you know, like, but a healthy diet of Australian authors and stuff would be nice. You know,
I mean, I'm reading Sarah J. Maas at the moment, so. But yeah, I'm trying to like,
yeah, girl.
Yeah. I'm definitely just trying to really up the Australian, especially when we're so lucky to be able to meet them and connect with them and talk to them. They're so welcoming and available, you know. It feels great to support them.
And I'm not going to diss anybody who grew up with Harry Potter, but I'm not. Well, I mean, unless my kid wants to, unless our children want to, Harry Potter's not going to be like at the forefront of their TBR. It's going to be Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow. That's going to be what we are going to raise our children with, or at least hoping that is what they're wanting to pick up first, what they want to pick up first, essentially. I think that it's really cool that Hachette took chances on that particular series. I just hope that more publishing companies take more chances with Aussie authors, because we do have some sort of promotion, but they're once in a blue moon promotions. You know, like we've got Amie Kaufman, Jay Kristoff, as of recently, Lynette Noni with the Prison Healer. But there's only a handful of names. So I'd say that I just hope that at least during the pandemic, as it's kind of probably sparked more stories or has encouraged more people to write, I'm hoping that there's fruit that has been that will be bared from that, essentially. And also I just want more book signings, like in-person book signings. Like I understand, like, as long as social distancing is something that we still do, it's just, I think it's a good way to keep the book community engaged, but also give them incentive to, first of all, buy the book, to get it signed, and to have that personal experience with an author. It all hits differently that way, in my personal experience. But yeah, no, I think that that's what makes Australian literature so special, because we have those personal experiences with these Aussie authors. So I'm just hoping that now that starts up again.
Well said, Grace.
I think sorry.
No, that's right. On a completely selfish note, I want my book club back. But I also think that the Australian film and television industry is starting to grow, and they're looking elsewhere for their stories, but I think they really should be looking at our own literature. That we've got so many books that could be adapted into incredible shows and films, and I think that if the Australian film and television industry worked more closely with our publishing industry, I think we could have some really great adaptations on our hands that could then be sent out and introduce the rest of the world into Australian literature without them having to pick up a book. And obviously, I mean, it's such a gateway to get people, you know, you get new viewers now watching, like using Shadow and Bone that's just come out. New people are watching that and going, oh, what is this YA fantasy that people are talking about? And they'll go and they'll pick up a book. And I think if we can have more adaptations of Australian literature, I think we'll find the same thing. I think we'll find people will go, oh, that came from an Aussie author. I wonder if they've got something else, or who do they recommend? And I think we could definitely get people reading more Aussie literature through that way.
Definitely. Just about got on from what Jenna was just saying, when they did the Dry, they did a release of that, and they had like a Zoom call thing with the author and Eric Banner and different people, and that was really, really cool, across Australia. And they were talking about how he doesn't get an opportunity to come back to Australia very much because the big roles aren't here, and how excited he was to be back at home. And it's just thinking about what you were saying before, that they, you know, the whole idea that they have to Americanize. If they adapt it, they have to Americanize because the actors aren't, you know, big enough. But then there are heaps of Australian actors, so exactly, they could make Australian books into Australian films using some of those bigger names like Hugh Jackman and Eric Banner and Nicole Kidman and whatnot, and it would be that branching out, and getting people interested, because they would actually know who the actors were as well. Like, that would be a draw card as well. It's just so strange that they go the other way. Well, we have to make it American because no one will know anything about it otherwise, but we'll use an Australian actor anyway.
What's an American accent?
Yeah,
sometimes.
Yeah, did you have anything, Kalana, that you want to
Yeah, I just want to see more, like Bianca said, I want to see more fantasy and sci-fi from Australian authors, because we have the readers, and I want to be able to rep Australian authors on my channel, and I want to be able to like get them out to the world and all of the things, but also in having a lot more published YA or adult even or new adult fantasy authors, then I think we're more likely to get book signings and get big book events and all that sort of stuff that we want to go to and that we will pay money to go to and hype up, because there are more of these bigger named published authors that will be going there. So I think it's like it just starts a whole cycle, and the beginning of that cycle is to publish more Australian literature.
Yeah, I for sure want more Aussie fantasy and sci-fi, and then for that to be adapted as well. Like acting is also something that I would love to do, and to do a like fantasy and not have to try and do an accent, that would be the best. Cool. Also on a completely random note, Jenna, are you wearing a folklore jumper?
Yes. Yes, I saw your cardigan immediately and was like, yes.
We match. Yeah, I only mine. Where does it say it? Folklore.
Amazing.
Cool. So thank you so much for everyone here for joining me, for staying up late, for almost falling asleep here, or coming in just after another meeting. I appreciate all of you so much, and to everyone watching, everyone will be linked down below. If I can find the bookstores or the books, they will all be linked below as well. If you are Australian, comment down below more Australian books or authors or bookstores or what you would want to see. And if you're not Australian, check out everything that we've mentioned, and preferably the Australian versions of books if you're able to get those. Yeah, that's it. If everyone, I don't know, wants to wave bye or something.
Bye.
And then I will stop the thing.